let's tell us about thin brick, some of the history, the age of thin brick. You know so much more about thin brick than I do. I was kind of the Hanley days in the 80s, about I packaged it as a laborer in the plant. But at that time, I think the sizes were changing. If I remember right, 1 inch to 3/4 inch, which I always thought that was how we leaving that 3 5/8 to 4 inch white wall to go so thin. But at that time, I was told it was because of the apartments and the space and so much room in New York City, and they can get more room space if they have a thinner wall system and those kind of things. I don't know how true any of that was. That was just me as a kid in the business.
Well, some of it was true from 4 down to 1 or 2, but codes had a lot to do with thickness too. But let's talk about that. Over the years, I've probably known 4 people that think they invented thin brick. And when I tell them that the first thin brick project that I know about was a house that was built for the Chicago World Fair in 1934. I think it was 34, it could be 1937.
Wow.
But in their exhibit hall, they built a house and they sided it with thin brick.
Was that the metal lath you were talking about the other night, that they did the metal lath to put the thin bricks in?
No, that's different.
That's later?
Yeah,
time?
that was later. And then...
so what did they have as a backup? Do you remember what the backup was to put the thin brick on?
I'm just going to say it was a stud wall. With,
back then? Okay.
Yeah. But I didn't see it, so I don't know. But I just know that there was this house that was clad with thin brick at the World's Fair. Then, as I think I mentioned, Structural Clay Products Institute had a research headquarters in Geneva, Illinois called the Structural Clay Research Foundation. And they developed a thin product called Renew Veneer.
Okay.
And I still have the brochure that
yes, I remember you said about that. Yes.
That they used to promote it. And it was a thin brick that was, I think, maybe 3/4 inch thick. And they developed a metal clip system that you screwed to the wall or nailed to the wall, and then the brick clipped in it.
Okay.
And then you grouted it like we do today with a bag or a mortar gun. And but few people wanted to mess with it, and I think it was one of those things that they thought, oh, it's a product, it'll be gone in 2 years, and so it just never got off the ground, and mainly because manufacturers didn't want to make it. And so that died by the wayside, and then I didn't hear much about thin brick until much, much later. And then when I was in the brick, got into the brick business and joined Endicott, at that point in time in the early 70s, Michigan Brick in Corona, Michigan, developed a product called Real Brick, and they sold it as a packaged deal where they would supply the thin brick and the mastic, and it was mainly an interior decorating problem for behind a wood burning stove or the backdrop in the kitchen, or behind the stoves and so on. And they promoted that for a long time, very heavily in fact, spent a lot of money promoting thin brick in that form, and then started doing commercial projects with it. They developed panel systems to erect it that didn't turn out very good, and they had a lot of failures with it. But then we got into the thin brick business. First of all, we had a tile plant that we built in 1979 to make floor tile, 1/2 inch thick. We made 4x8s and 8x8s. And so to make thin brick, it was just a natural for us because we were already making thin product. We just had to order different dyes.
Got it.
And so when we got into...
And that's a finer clay, right? You make that with a...
Yes, yeah, we grind the clay much finer. So when we got in that business, and that's mainly because we wanted to make smooth product, so we grind it finer so you don't have the texture.
And less absorption, right? For all that.
And somewhat less absorption, right? We saw the potential for the market, and it really blossomed first in California. Our distributor in California found out that we could do this, and they started promoting our product out there very successfully. And then we just, the market continued to grow. And from 1984 until, well, basically until I retired, our thin brick market grew by 20 to 30% every year. And then we got into the precast market, supplying thin brick for precast concrete panels. And that's where they developed the very tight size requirements, +0 minus a 16th inch.
Okay.
And if you couldn't do that, then you either had to grind or you just couldn't supply the jobs.
Right, you're grinding it to that size to get the dimensions down.
We didn't have to grind it.
You didn't, but someone else would have to,
Yeah,
right? That's
right.
okay.
Yeah. And of course, then that adds to the extremely to the cost. And then other people, of course, the easiest way to, well, and so the industry developed, the thin brick business, I should say, began to really develop, and we grew with it. We, at one point, early on, I tried to get our distributors, brick distributors, interested in thin brick, but most of them viewed thin brick as a competitor to full.
And it is.
And they said, you know, we don't want to upset our masonry contractors, and because they'll think we're selling a competing product.
Yep.
And you sell thin brick by the square foot, we sell brick by the 1,000, and it's just different customer base, and we just don't want anything to do with it. So we finally said, well, we're going to have to do it ourselves. So we went direct with the precasters and really developed that market. But in the early stages, when we got into it, there were just a handful of people making thin brick. Michigan Brick, as I said, and in Michigan, Owensboro, Kentucky, they were in it. And then Summitville, as we started promoting the business.
And they still are doing it, Summitville, right?
Oh yes, and but they experienced the same thing, or Metro experienced the same thing that we did. And that was we lost our flat tile market to the imports, because 78-80% of the ceramic tile used in this country is imported. And so we were trying to get $2.85 a square foot for an 8x8 tile, when you could go to the big box stores and buy a 12x12 ground to perfection size that looked like marble or slate or whatever you wanted for 77 cents a square foot.
Yeah. And
we just couldn't compete, so we jumped into the thin brick market with both feet, and really, I think honestly we can take credit for building the thin brick market into what it is today. And then the recession hit, and manufacturers said, you know, we got to be in the thin brick business. Endicott's busy, why aren't we? So they started doing it. Also, there was the fact that as thin brick developed, as the market developed, there were many jobs that had both full brick and thin brick. And if you couldn't supply the thin brick, you didn't get the full brick order.
Very nice. Yeah.
So the manufacturer said, we've got to be able to do thin brick. So, well, the quickest, cheapest way to get into it is to buy a saw, masonry saw, and set somebody down and saw slabs off a brick. And so that's what many manufacturers did and still do today.
And the corners were harder on them to make, the corners by sawing.
Very much harder, very much harder.
Was that because the thin brick was higher up in the buildings? You'd have the full brick down on the base, and then
A lot of times that was the case, yes, yeah. And of course, manufacturers that run into the problems, they couldn't meet those tight specifications of +0 minus a 16th. And that was for a 12-inch brick or an 8-inch brick, didn't make any difference.
Wow.
So, and there were tight absorptions requirements, 6% cold water absorption maximum. And so it was a very, very tough market. But we grew it and grew into it. We paid our prices along the way, with problems and so on, where we didn't meet the size, maybe have an order come out and didn't quite meet the size deal, and you have to work through the problems that went with developing a new market. But we did it, we're very successful at it, and I think today we're probably the largest manufacturer still of thin brick in the country.
That's amazing. A lot of people don't realize how big a brick is when you make it green, and then how much it shrinks when you have to dry it and then fire it. They don't realize, and then try to meet a certain size, and you got up depending how big the kiln cars are, tall and wide.
Right.
There's a lot of variations in that, but a lot of people realize when you grind fine and do what you do, you talk about, you got good clay, the shrinkage is probably a lot less. But you go like Bigler, a lot of times to get a brick at 7 5/8, the brick's over 8 1/4 or 8 1/2 inches long.
Yeah.
There's a lot of variables, when it shrinks.
Yeah,
that
7-8%.
It really is. It's huge. So a lot of people put grind up brick to put back into brick. That's a lot of ways to try to control shrinkage.
Yeah, we did that
all the way through. So, no, that's really good. So the thin brick, let's talk about the thicknesses changing over the years. So what's the thickest that you remember? Is it an inch or is it 3/4? And then what's it down to, what, 1/2 inch today?
Well, I can tell you that we supplied thin brick for our first precast job in 1972 on a bank in Effingham, Illinois, south of Chicago, about 2 hours. And the precaster was Wilson Concrete out of Omaha. They precasted the brick in Omaha and shipped them by truck to Effingham, Illinois, 1972. And then in that case, the brick were 2 inches thick, or 1 7/8, because we made a modular brick and curved it down the center and broke it in two and got 2 pieces out of one.
Perfect. Okay.
So in essence, they started at like 2 inches thick. And then some manufacturers made them and, started extruding a thinner unit, like 1 inch thick, 3/4. Ours were always 1/2 inch because we already had the tile.
Okay.
Where we made a 1/2 inch thick.
So they started competing more towards trying to get to where you were.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd like to take credit for building the thin brick market into what it is today. I think we were largely
there's no doubt about it. So when I was working in the factory, when I was working at the Andy plant as just a laborer packing brick, I had no clue where the brick were going or who we're competing against. I just knew that we had colors and we're packaging. But I could remember that there was always a push on talking about, when I was a glaze foreman, about trying to reproduce iron spots. Of course, I never had samples. It was just, we want these iron spot look specs, and we put actual frit in the brick clay to make things, to some of the glazes that have that frit look and all that, and burn it out in the clay. But the problem is whatever we were making next that didn't have frit in it, that frit stayed in the pug mill forever, and it created some real problems for us. What we make next, it would just keep coming and showing up all the time, so we had to come up with coatings. So that's why they really wanted to get rid of exposing ourselves to that contaminant.
Sure.
It wasn't the contaminant for that run, it was whatever followed, it was a contaminant.
Right.
So that's why they wanted to do the spray spots all the time. But I can remember the thickness being issues, because we made a lot of thin brick that were the 2 pieces, but they had little, just a little bit of a left of a brick part of the coring, but it was not holes, it was straight, that easy, and had little curves on them, so you could easily tap it with a little hammer and they would break.
Right.
Sometimes it break freely and you get 2 pieces. But going thinner was a little more difficult, because a thicker piece, it held together better, but the thinner, it was hard to pack, set those in the cars and then take them off. So now that I think back of it, it was the influence of Endicott on what they were trying to do at that time, just trying to get in that market and compete themselves. Of course, they're a lot closer to the market they wanted to go to than you were. To out of Somerville, Pennsylvania to New York was a lot closer than coming from here, even though it's straight across. It's not hugely, but it's still shipping distances.
Well, I think thin brick is it's a great product. I think it's here to stay, and I can certainly understand why other manufacturers are, have gotten into it and to the extent that they have. As I said, when we first got in it, our brick distributors didn't want anything to do with it. But I think that they have really seen that it's a product that's here, and they better be a player, or they're going to be out on the outside looking in.
Yeah, the Chip and his team, they're looking at it now, how it goes together in the wall systems, and they're looking at the whole process again, through the entire wall system. What's nice about the BIA, we talk about the integrity of brick in the brick industry. It's but it's the wall system, you know, that they're protecting, and they want to have the best wall. They want to put together the best wall that'll work in the best conditions that they do. So
Right.
they're doing a lot of stuff that way, but there's no doubt their attention's on it. I think the same thing as you do about it's here to stay. I do understand though the thinking, you know, of you know, we're losing the masons, you know, we're losing that type of market to them. The thin brick is another way to combat that, but I don't want that to be the reason we lose masons, because it's just like all these hotels, you know, that you stay at and we're at. They just put that lick and stick stuff on, or the stone on it, or whatever. It's simple, it's fast, and that's what they do. The thin brick has a chance to compete in that market, that era, than it does full brick.
The good thing is that there are manufacturers that are making panels now for applying thin brick. It's not precast, it's like Glengarry's panel, ThinTech, the metal panel. Bob Terzulli's company that makes theirs called, what is it? I forget what his company, Tabs Wall System.
Oh, I did not know he was part of the Tabs. Okay.
Yeah, he started that. And there was a company in Michigan that made a metal panel called Easywall. And so they have developed methods of attaching thin brick to be field applied, but not precast. And that's been a savior for the thin brick market too, because there you don't have the precise size control requirements. Because you're placing them by hand and you can space them and route them after they're all attached to the panel.
So I shared with you last night that the BIA redid the test they did all those years ago, fired a 2x4. So they fired 2x4 at, you know, a stucco, they fired through a hardy board, you know, and it just fires straight through. And then they fire a 2x4 at a brick wall, and that's made to just the normal code today. And it just stands up and it just shatters the board, and the brick wall is a 10. I was thinking about when they were doing that, and then they do an orange, and then they do a snowball, you know, an ice ball, they do it, and it fires through everything, but just nothing for brick. I mean, just brick's such a great product. And I was thinking about that after we talked last night, that they really should do that with a thin brick wall. I would love to see what it stands up to, because even if it's a ½ inch or, you know, a little thicker to an inch, or whatever, that might be the standard, maybe the ½ inch, whatever that standard is right now. How does that hold up? And that wall system that we did, the ½ inch, how does that hold up being brick versus hardy board and the others?
Well, I don't think you'd get the performance as you do with full brick, because thin brick is just that, it's very thin. And I know for a fact that a kid throwing a baseball against the wall can break the thin brick if it's not fully embedded underneath.
Okay.
And when you attach it to a panel, it's usually at 2 dabs of construction adhesive on the back of the brick, and then that holds it in place until the joints are grouted, and that's what really holds the system together.
Okay.
So between the dabs of brick, you have a hollow space, which is good for drainage.
Got it.
To let water drain down through, but a kid throwing a baseball against a wall could break that brick.